All right, so the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. I'm following the river down the highway through the cradle of the Civil War. You know what song that is, yeah?
Oh yeah, Paul Simon's Graceland.
Yes. I titled it the episode that way because I wanted to talk a little bit about music, but I didn't know how to open up. And to me, that song has always been a classic song. I know it came out in the '80s on the Graceland album, but to me, for some reason, it's so powerful. Mark, lyrically, the images that it invokes, it's a very to me, and the fact that he says, "I am following the river through the cradle of the Civil War," the imagery that pops into your head is a very Americana theme and a journey, and it could be the way you interpret it in your head as generational. It could be, time period based and all this, but the actual meaning that the author was thinking about is slightly different. But at the same time, musicians allow for people to interpret their things so that it's meaningful for themselves. And I don't know if you know the story of why he wrote that and what he meant.
I don't know the meaning behind the tune,
Okay.
but so I don't know if it was a metaphor for something else
Okay.
or if it incorporated something else. So if you know, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah. So, well, that's what. So, Graceland, it was recorded by Paul Simon, and it's
Mhm.
from his Graceland album, and it's actually Paul Simon's road trip through from Louisiana up to Graceland proper, the actual house,
Mhm.
Elvis Presley's mansion, and his journey through that area. So he says through the cradle of the Civil War and all this, and he's traveling with his son from his first marriage, and he
Mhm.
mentions it in the song. My traveling companion is the child of my first marriage, and I'm going to Graceland. Well, he had just divorced Carrie Fisher,
Right.
and he was, I guess, sad about that, and he
Sure.
wrote a song about his journey
Mhm.
through the South towards Graceland. I think it's such an awesome thing the way he wrote it.
Yeah.
So lyrically, in my mind, I never knew this, but I read about it. I'm thinking some sort of like he's just bringing up, but he's using words that he drew in to
Mhm.
create this magical. Because I think it's a very powerful lyric. I use it all the time in my powerful lyric, and it has an actual life event that's meaningful to him, where that comes from.
A lot of songwriters have done that, incorporated that into their music. I just didn't know that about Paul Simon on this particular tune. I guess I never really paid much attention to the lyric as I should have. I know the song has got a definite groove
Oh yeah,
and it's got that definite rhythm to it that he took a lot of heat for. It was the South African rhythm. And I know that the whole album caused a lot of controversy. I didn't know the reasoning behind the song, but I knew the reasoning behind the whole album. He basically fell in love with a bootleg cassette that he borrowed from a friend that was recordings of some South African uh, music. And he just absolutely fell in love with it and became entranced in it.
yeah,
And that entire album is just loaded with an Americanized version of the South African rhythms.
yeah.
And I don't know. I thought I didn't know if maybe that was kind of where you were going with it as far as um, the following the river down the highway through the cradle of the Civil War, and the fact that it was it was recorded during the time of apartheid using African performers, singers, players, and basically an Americanized version of the South African beats.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I always personally see because so I know that he the same as you, he used the African rhythm sections and
Mhm.
vocals from was it Mambazo Black
Yeah.
Black something Mambazo. That's a
Black African Mombasa. Yeah.
Yeah. They have these very strong vocals and stuff. It's one of their songs are on the album. I
Right.
think it starts it off. But I never connected those two things. But see, that's another connection. I was thinking really just using whatever regional musicians, and he's telling his stories, which was my main thought process. But the fact of the matter is, with the Graceland thing, to me, it brought back. Well, I can't say it brought back because I went alive back then, but it gave me notions of a journey through America,
Right.
On a pilgrimage.
Yeah.
And Graceland, to me, it gave me an imagery of traveling through time, through America, from one point to the other, with the origin, the destination being Graceland and Elvis Presley and music. See, that's what's beautiful about it. You mentioned that connection, so you had that in your mind. I didn't focus on that. I focused on this other bit here that I'm saying, but it invokes a lot of imagery, for people.
Well, that's part of the problem of studying English. Is half of the study of English, and especially the literature, be it American or from the UK, or even from Central Europe or wherever, Asia, South America. When you study literature, so much of what is written is a metaphor for something else. And so you start to translate that over into other things. And so much of music is a metaphor for something else. If you take a look at the lyrics as just a pedestrian listener, they mean what they say. And that's why this song kind of mystified me a little bit, because in this case, he did mean what he said. It wasn't a metaphor. If it was a metaphor at all, it was a metaphor for the pilgrimage his son and him were going on. They just wanted to go to Graceland. But he spends the majority of the lyric talking about the breakup with his wife. So there is a little bit of a juxtaposition there.
Yeah.
But when you know the backstory of the album and how the album came about, the heat he took for it and everything else, you have to start to step back and wonder, is this a metaphor for something else? Is this an atonement of sins, or is this just, it is exactly as it is, and there is no hidden message in there. So
the lyric, well, yeah, totally. So the lyric, to me, that's also the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. Mm-hmm. We know the national guitar is that steel guitar that has that very loud twang to it, and blues players use it for slide and all sorts of things. And I can picture the imagery, the Delta shimmering off the water, the sun, like a national guitar that's made out of basically aluminum or whatever. It's got this chrome.
It's chrome plate. They're usually chrome plated brass, but yeah.
Yeah, and so that imagery and the way is such a beautiful. That's a great, one of the most powerful, in my opinion, songs lyrically. And I just like the song.
Yeah, I do too. And the whole album is that way. I mean, the groove is just, you can't say enough about it. You really can't say enough about the groove of that album. I mean, whether it's Graceland or something like Call Me Owl, not Owl, Owl.
Yeah.
Who? Owl. Oh, Owl. You can't mistake that definitive South African rhythm in there. And he became totally obsessed by it. And that's why he took the heat he took for it, because this was in the middle of they called it the cultural boycott of South Africa, and which actually started in the 60s, but and then went all the way through until the fall of apartheid in the 90s. 1991, I want to say, but I may be wrong. It may have been 92 or 3. But it's a fabulous album.
My aunt was always, my Aunt Carmen was always on, the top of, everything that was coming out musically, because she was very much into, and she had purchased that album or that cassette. And we were traveling one summer towards Sanibel Island. on the west coast of Florida.
Yeah.
And she picked us up. My mom and I, my dad was working and all that, but we get in the car and she said, "Oh, you got to listen to the new Paul Simon," which was Graceland. And she pops in the cassette and it starts, and I'm sitting in the back with the speakers behind me. I think it was a Volvo, like a gray Volvo that she had back then, which back then it was like one of those amazing cars. I remember people would say, you know, the way they're designed, you know, if they get into an accident, they pretty much keep, you know, their structure, because inside, you know, Volvo was this big thing. I'm in this Volvo, and my head is leaned back, and she pops in the cassette, and then it starts with the first song, or wherever it started doing the Black something Mambazo group, and as it finishes, it starts with, oh no, did it start with a diamond? Yeah, diamonds on the soles of her shoes starts with some sort of African chant, what diamonds on the soles of her shoes, what diamonds on, and it slows down, and then it starts with a song. Well, I told my aunt once it stopped, I said, "Oh no, play it again," and she did, and I leaned my head because I heard the voices.
Yeah.
And I'm a little kid, I'm interested in, and it finishes, and I said, "Oh, play it again." Like I did it like 4 times, and everybody in the car was just, you know, pissed.
It's like, okay, we're done, right?
Yeah, she even switched out the cassette and put something else, because she was like, and this was a brand new cassette to her. But in my mind, even as a little kid, I'm listening to the patterns and trying to figure out, you know, I have that in my head, and I'm trying to acquire knowledge from it. It's like a textbook that I'm actually reading, as opposed to just casually listening to it. They didn't want anything of it, but it was that big of an album for me to be exposed to because of that African chant. Yeah, and then afterwards the other stuff.
And it turns out that there are a couple of different groups there. One of them was called Black African Mombasa, and the other one was called Ladysmith African Mombasa.
Okay.
Mambazo, excuse me. And that's who was on the album with him, was Ladysmith.
Okay. So that was powerful for me.
And I'm with you, because while you wouldn't think something like a rhythm or a backup track or even backup singers would make an album like that, I mean, there are plenty of other cases where we both know that it ding dong sure did.
Yeah.
You know, that was just new to most folks in the US. They never heard anything like that. And like I said, he got the idea and just absolutely became obsessed with that bootleg of a couple of albums that a friend of his had. It was, you know, a bootleg cassette. Then he copied it himself to keep it going, and just basically kind of wore it out.
Well, part of this whole bit also is the idea, going back to that national guitar, using that imagery, and a little bit about guitars. There's a list of guitars that are, because not only do we talk about famous guitarists and bands and such, but there's also popularity and fame attached to the actual instruments that almost become as popular as the musicians themselves that play them. And so there's a list, if I might share with you,
go ahead,
of these, and see what you. This is just a list that someone did, but it's a good jumping off point to see what your thoughts are.
And it's going to be interesting for me, because while I've built guitars in the past and I've been a guitar fan and a guitar junkie for years, I'm not really up on all of the instruments that are out there. I mean, I know people that can look at something and go, "Oh man, no, that's a 1965 Gibson ES 125." But if you notice, he's done a little bit different with the bridge over here. He shaved that down, and that's different. I'm not up on that kind of thing. You know, I know most of the major ones, but that's about it.
I'm with you, even though I play my instruments and this and that. I'm not particularly the like totally into, but the fact that like the specifics of each thing, I'm not like that. Like I'm the guy that, you know, I get the guitar and I play it, and I might not know the details of it, more than likely not know, except for the generalized idea of it. I just never focused on that, on the technical side of it. because I was more interested in the story and songwriting side of it.
Yeah.
But
So I guess you could classify me as a junkie, but not a nerd or a geek.
right. Well, there's a lot to the world of music and musicians,
Yeah.
from the casual listener
Mhm.
to the more, to the more specific listener, where they're into collections and whatnot, and the stories behind, and then you have the musicians. I just And then the electronic, I guess, geeks, you could say,
Mhm.
pedal people that are into pedals, amplifiers,
Oh,
the
gosh.
recording
Yeah.
people. It just goes into music is a big topic because of that. Everybody has their specialities,
Specialities. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's like, but in any event, I'll give you a list, and some of these I'm not aware of,
Okay.
and you might be,
Okay.
whether it's the musician attached to the instrument,
Mhm.
and others we might both not be aware of. I don't know. We'll find out.
Okay.
But this is a list of popular guitars that have an attachment to musicians,
Okay.
and this is their list. I didn't, organize these numbers. It's just I'm using it as a jumping
Okay.
board here. So the first one is Kurt Cobain's Fender Jag Stang.
Okay. That I have seen and I have heard about it, and I've done a little bit of comparisons. And basically, what they did was they took certain lines of the Jaguar
Right.
and combined it with other lines from the Mustang
Mm-hmm.
and kind of put it together into a custom shape. And folks looked at it and went, "Whoa, that's incredibly different." To the pedestrian music listener, if you saw him play it live, you would say that's just a guitar. But I do know exactly what you're talking about. That's one of them that I know of. In fact, I believe they went into production.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because Cobain combined. It says here both guitars, and as the story goes, he designed the guitar himself by a montage of Polaroid photos to get the shape that he wanted. And then later he pitched that model to Fender, and they made it for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, after he passed away, his guitar was given to REM, Peter Buck, and you can see it in their video. What's the frequency, Kenneth?
Yep.
So
that's also an interesting look at pre-Photoshop days, because I do remember taking several pictures and cutting them up and putting them together to get something, and wishing I had a way to
do what we do now
to get that big print. Yeah.
The next one is James Hetfield's ESP Explorer, which he uses a lot.
Yeah.
And so they add that into the list. I've never been if you guys know which guitar that is, it's got that sort of shape. I don't even know how to explain it, but it's kind of like a very sharp,
sharp angles.
Yeah. And I'm not a fan of that at all.
I think it has its place. I think that body style is used more in metal than any other body style. There are still a few that will use the Gibson Les Paul body style.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few now that I think about it, that use a Stratocaster style body.
Very few.
But that Explorer is huge.
Yeah.
And so that association with metal, and I think it's just because the body itself is so big. It's a very long body, and it's so deeply resonant. I mean, metal music is all about tone, sustain, and resonance, and the Explorer does that.
Yeah. Well, they list it there, and I think you're right. Mm-hmm. I'm not a fan of the shape of it, and I don't know. Are you a fan of the shape of it, or?
I mean, it has its place. It looks cool. But now, you being a musician, you have to think about the ergonomics of the thing. Can you hold on to it? Does it get in your way? If you try to move in certain positions, you have more things to consider than I do. I'm one of those guys that can sit back, look at it, and go, "That's cool," but that's about all I can do because I don't play. So I don't have to worry about hanging that thing around my neck, for an hour up on a stage.
One other thing I'll tell you, that's related but not related, but you just made me think of it in this conversation. So anytime in the past that I've played with buddies or been invited to play at whatever occasion, and I'd get there and I didn't bring my guitar,
Mhm.
and somebody said, "Oh, use my guitar or check this guitar out," and I, you know, put it on and tested it out. A lot of guitarists, especially in the rock and roll and all that, tend to drop the guitar so that it hangs at your crotch.
Yeah.
And I've never, and that's of my roughly of my era to do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, that
Um,
became real big with the punk and the grunge thing. Both of them did that.
well, although that is something of my era, I can't. I was up in I was up in San Francisco years and years and years ago,
Mhm.
and I was at a lodge, staying at a lodge. Lucky me. And when I came down, and it was cold outside. What a beautiful. And I came down. It's just such a great thing, you know. Berkeley is you can drive to Berkeley very close.
Mhm.
Little cafes and bookstores and record stores, and it's
Oh, yeah.
cold as heck, and it's
Yep.
wonderful. It's so cold that you don't know how you're moving, but you do it
Yeah.
anyhow.
Mark
It's
Twain once said the coldest winter I ever spent was the summer I spent in San Francisco.
what a what a summer he spent. Um, but so I went down the steps, and inside the, I guess, a reception area,
Mhm.
they had a band playing for the people of that, and everyone was welcome to it. So I went in, and the guitarist was playing with his guitar, and not where I use it, which is around the belly,
Mhm.
because that's enough for me to fold my hands up and grab onto the neck and play, but not so up where you're like, you're trying to hang on for
You're
dear life.
wearing it as a bow tie.
Well, this guy loaned me his guitar in between sets. He said, "Here, try it out," because we got to talking. Because he was playing all the standards of rock and roll from back in the day,
Mhm.
and he was like an old timer.
Mhm.
Um, and I put the guitar on, and it was resting at my chest area, and I started playing and stuff, and I said, "Wow, this is very comfortable. Actually, it's even more comfortable than where I sit with my guitar because it's all right there.
Yeah.
It looks nerdy as heck,
Yeah.
but it's efficient and effective when you're wanting to rock and roll, at least for me and my so. But on the other flip side, going back to Miami and me hanging out with they would drop it to their crotch area.
Mhm.
And I would always tell them, "How do you play like this?" And then they put it on, and you see them turning their wrists where it's almost breaking their wrist to play the
Mhm.
guitar. And I'm looking at them, and I can't do that. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to do that. It looks cool. It looks like they're like, "Hey, man, I don't care what life has to bring.
Mhm.
Bring it on. I'm such a rock and roll." But I don't. I'm
Well,
looking at that, and it don't work for me.
that's got to be a guitarist's inside joke because I have never thought it looked cool. It always looked to me like you didn't know how to wear it.
Yeah.
And you might be able to hit all the notes, but you didn't know really what you were doing. I mean, that's to me, that's what it looked like. And I don't play, so I can't really comment. But it did look uncomfortable, and it looked like, man, didn't nobody ever show you how to adjust a strap? Those things adjust, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's the style that they would go for, and
More
I'll
power
tell you.
to you.
But I sit somewhere in the belly area,
Mhm.
right slightly there in that area, and there's a lot of area to cover. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
But that's where it sits, and
Mhm.
I find that's the reasonable place, and it's comfortable for me to play. The next guitar up in the chart here, I think you've heard about. Willie Nelson's Trigger guitar is a famous guitar.
Yeah, I've heard about it. I'm not, I'm going to cheese a few people off here and say I'm not a big fan of Willie.
Whoa.
It's just not my style of music. He's an excellent songwriter. Um, he's an excellent lyricist. Um, his musicality is great, but it's just not my style. You know.
He so well, I mean, I can't, I get it.
Mhm.
I am not always popping in that, Willie Nelson CD, but I do have fond memories of discovering the album That Redheaded Stranger,
Mhm.
and I'm a big fan of the Old West America.
Mhm.
A very big fan of it. It's like comfort food to
Mhm.
me, or
Now,
comfort whatever to me.
I'll surprise you by saying I did see the movie once, The Redheaded Stranger, but
And
that was
I'll
so many years
surprise
ago. I don't even remember who was in it. I think Sam Elliott was in it. I may be wrong.
I'll surprise you. I never watched it.
Yeah, yeah. See, we've switched roles.
Yeah,
Now, again, there are some things that Willie Nelson has done. I mean, I don't think you can be a person and not like Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain.
yeah.
I really dug Poncho and Lefty. Him and I think it was Merle Haggard. I may be wrong there. And of course, The Highwayman, that whole album. There was some good music on there. But just going out and listening to Willie Nelson, it just doesn't happen. It's not my style of music.
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, just as a thing, that one album, and
Mhm.
of course a lot of his classic songs, but it's not like I'm gonna, it's
Sure.
Willie Nelson, let's jump over the ravine because I got to get to the other side. But it is like, hey, so the whole Old West theme of that
Yeah.
album,
Yeah.
I liked it so much, and I like because if you close your eyes and listen to that with headphones, you kind of get that sort of vibe, and you can see someone
Mhm.
standing by the well, in their homestead out in the middle
Mhm.
of nowhere and a town, and I like the imagery and all that. He
Mhm.
he isn't I don't want to say profound, but like psychedelia
Mhm.
and whatnot, and he's very straightforward with the stories, so it's not like rock and roll
Mhm.
necessarily. So
Yeah.
it has its place as music, but
Oh,
that's
it sure does. And and also I would beg to differ you on one minor point. No, it's not rock and roll, but it certainly influenced some rock and rollers.
oh yeah.
So, as far as the guitar goes, I'm not even sure what Trigger is, but I do know here's the extent of my knowledge. I do know that Willie Nelson owns an iconic guitar that he named Trigger. And that's as far as it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know. Is it a Martin, a Taylor, what?
Here's the bit. His guitar trigger was named after the famous horse that was
Sure.
featured in Roy
Roy
Rogers'
Rogers
film,
movie. Yeah.
and it's a Martin N20 guitar,
Okay.
and it was bought in 1969, and it has stayed with him ever since.
Okay.
But
Cool.
Trigger has a lot of wear and tear on it, and there's holes, and the wood has thinned out because of the nail and fingers scratching up on it, and the pick card, it's
Mhm.
all done away, and yet it's still together. It's got a massive
And
hole.
that's what makes it iconic is because he's been playing it roughly since 1969. You
Now,
know, that's what made number one SRV's Stratocaster. That's what made it iconic. That's what made the Log. Les Paul's The Log, he called it, where he just basically shoved a hunk of 2x4, or excuse me, 4x4 into guitar and fitted pickups to it and made his own electric guitar. I mean, that's what made those guitars iconic, was
the
their story.
well, it's the story, and to
Mhm.
me, it's all about the story.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I've come to that conclusion. That's kind of where I sit. That's where I sit. That's where my
Mhm.
interest lies. But Trigger, there's a video on YouTube where it's taken the actual guitar to a guitar shop, and the luthier, sits and cleans it, repairs it, adds a little bit of like what is it, shellac to fill
Mhm.
out the wood that's exposed, and he explains in the video, and you should all check it out. In fact, we have among other things, we have a Trampled Underfoot podcast Facebook page, and for you folks listening, we do post a few of the things we comment on throughout the course of our podcast, and sometimes we'll connect you with links and pictures and other things, and so you might want to go over there and press like and follow that. So we'll post something about Willie Nelson's Trigger because it's a video and it's beautiful. He says that he doesn't want it really repaired. He
Right.
just wants it held together, and that's
He,
exactly
he
what.
wants to be able to keep playing it, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So there's that, and I'll just name a few others and see what you think.
Okay.
What comes to mind when you think of this? Is again a list that we're going
Well,
through
I
that we
I
picked.
didn't want to hijack your list or anything, but in
Mhm.
talking about Stevie Ray Vaughan's number one and what made it so iconic, he was to the point before he passed away, he was starting to move away from using it because it had been damaged so much, repaired so much and so often over the years, and refretted so many times. He would only pull it out and play it on certain tunes because he couldn't even guarantee it would make it all the way through that tune.
Right.
So there towards the end of his life, he was playing more and more on a butterscotch Stratocaster that had kind of the red tortoiseshell pick guards on it, and on a white Stratocaster that had lipstick pickups on it. All of them highly modified by Rene Martinez, his tech, and his basically his gear guru. But it was just literally falling apart and couldn't be made new again. It was beyond that point without complete replacement of several components, or just completely trashing it and starting over. So that was what he was kind of moving towards doing. He didn't want to get rid of it because it had two names. The first one was number one, and the second one was his first wife,
Yeah.
because it's the one that he kept throughout his entire career from start to finish. And you know, Jim Dockrell over there posted the butterscotch Strat was Lenny. I think you can tell Lenny, the guitar named Lenny, a mile away, because it is the only guitar in his arsenal with a maple fretboard. He was absolutely always chasing that deep tone, but he wanted the power and the punch of single coil pickups. And all of his guitars had rosewood fretboards except Lenny. That was the only one he owned with a maple fretboard that he
I've owned
performed with on stage.
I've owned a couple of maple fretboards and in the Strat style, and they have a certain feel to it, and it's very good. Um, in fact, that's one thing that I'd like to buy is an honest to goodness American Strat someday.
Oh, you and about 52 million other people who would, I mean, when you see they start at 3K and go up,
Yeah,
and
but
some of them go up sharply. But
yeah, I mean they're the standard, or one of them
yep,
next to the Gibsons. So
yep.
moving on to, oh, and by the way, there's also a video on Fender picking up on that guitar from Stevie Ray Vaughan
Mhm.
and copying it for for mass production, which
Right.
is also on YouTube somewhere.
Mhm.
We'll figure out looking for that one and place it in the Facebook page
Mhm.
of Trampled Underfoot podcast. But
Yeah.
the next one is, see if you know or can tell me about anything that comes to mind. Bo Diddley's Twang Machine,
Bo
Gretsch.
Bo Diddley's Gretsch. Gosh, you can buy them. You can buy one. It's patterned after a cigar box guitar that he learned how to play on, and I can't remember the Gretsch model number. I used to be able to recite this chapter and verse. It's an orange body. It's rectangular body. It looks like a cigar box, but it's a hollow body Gretsch guitar.
Mhm.
You can get the imported ones they started around $700. The real made in the USA Gretsch Bo Diddley model, they started around 4 grand. And
Amazing.
it is as iconic as Bo Diddley is. I mean, you cannot mistake his guitar for any other player at all.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's very and as far as so he actually learned on a cigar box.
a lot of people learned on cigar box guitar. Jimi Hendrix played a cigar box guitar. It's not what he learned on, but he played one. Muddy Waters started on a cigar box guitar. I mean, those are just some of the names, but a huge number of guitarists that started on cigar box guitars. They couldn't afford guitars, so they made them. Um, George Benson didn't start on cigar box guitar. He started on a homemade guitar because his dad couldn't afford to buy him one. Brian May of Queen still plays the Red Special, which is the guitar he and his father built out of an old fireplace mantle. And they did everything wrong, but it's perfect. And that's what he learned to play on, and that's what he's still using. It's him and his
Amazing.
dad built it, you know.
It's just an amazing thing, you know.
Yeah.
So continuing, let's see. I'll give you a couple of others. It's an extended list. Gene Simmons axe bass.
Yep. And that's another one of those that I can look at and go, cool, but I couldn't tell you anything about it. I assume it's made by Gibson because Kiss was famous for playing Gibson instruments.
Do you remember when you
don't
came
know
up?
that it is.
Do you remember seeing that for the first time and the impressions of Kiss at all? Or you weren't very much?
When I first saw them, I didn't know what to make of them. I was in high school when they came out, and the first song I heard by them was Rock and Roll All Night. But I never I never had anything visual to go by. I heard it on the radio.
Right.
And I saw their Kiss Alive 2 album, and I thought, who the hell is this?
And the name is kind of, I don't know, but if you didn't have any imagery and it's called Kiss, it's kind of like for a young boy liking the rock and roll, it sounds almost sissy like. If you can say that. I don't know. Is that okay in 2020? Probably not.
I have to back up a little bit. It wasn't Kiss Alive 2 where I saw what they looked like. It was, see, I'm not huge fans. I'm not total devotees to them or anything like that. I heard them growing up. I was a teenager at the time, and you had like Christine 16 and Calling Dr. Love and those songs. And I saw the albums out there, but I didn't really pay much attention to them because I was over in the blues section, or I was over looking at Pink Floyd or, something else. And they were just kind of there. But when I actually saw what they looked like on that Kiss Alive 2 album and paid attention to them, and that's where I saw that guitar. And I was like, what the?
Did it look ridiculous? Was it ridiculous?
It looked cool. I'll give them that.
Okay. I want to know your impression.
Yeah, it did look cool. And I thought, well, that does look cool. And as a guitar kind of, junkie, I guess, I was like, man, that would be a son of a gun to play. But I don't play anyway, so what the heck? And at that time, you have to remember, bassists were not bassists. They were bass players. They were only there because you had to have one. They weren't real musicians, is the way most pedestrian listeners thought about bass. They didn't pay attention to bass. It was just there to fill in.
Right.
It was only later that I really started to think about it and really started to pay attention to it. And I thought, well, wow, man. Yeah. That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah. We grew up thinking that too, a little, or at least I did, in the context of, I was like, they wanted me to be the bass player amongst friends. I was like, the bass player.
Well, it wasn't just us who didn't really pay attention to the bass player too. It was all the way up. When you think about all the music in the world, The Who was the first group to ever feature a bass solo in a rock and roll song. That was Boris the Spider, written by the bass player. Boris the Spider. Then you had My Generation featured a couple of bass solos in there. So it was, what can you say? It took that long before the bass became recognized.
Sticking with the bass, the next one on the list is Paul McCartney's Hofner bass.
That's very iconic, extremely iconic. And as a matter of fact, every band that ever had a bassist that plays one was immediately branded a Beatle knockoff. They could sound nothing like the Beatles, look nothing like the Beatles, but if somebody had that Hofner violin body bass, they were a Beatles knockoff band, and that was all there was to it.
I love that bass, and I have a copy of that bass. It's a Hofner. Obviously, it's a copy of the original, but it's a Hofner, and it plays. I gotta have some work done on it though, but it plays with the electronics. I have a switch that's having issues. It plays beautifully, and for the fact that it's got a shorter neck, but you can do the bass notes. You can go really fast on that, moving around in a comfortable way, and it's just an interesting and fun. It's a fun instrument to play when you're recording and all that. It's really fun for me as a musician to have that in my hands and play. It feels like you can really rock out with it. So that's another one of the instruments in the list. And let's see here.
Okay.
We do have Brian May's guitar, like you mentioned. Then we have Eddie Van Halen's Frankenstrat.
Not a fan of Van Halen. I know I just cheesed off half of the people listening to us. Not a fan of Van Halen.
Yeah, I can see how some folks
they're just kind of there. Okay, fine. I wish them nothing but success. Well, individually and together, I wish them nothing but success. It's just meh. Okay.
Well, all right. We'll leave it at that.
But I do know a little bit about the Frankenstrat. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. So, you know.
Another one is Angus Young's SG guitar. Jimmy Page's Gibson Les Paul, the standard that he used.
The double neck Strat too, I would imagine, is there. Angus Young's SG. Somebody asked Angus one time why he played that SG, and he said, simply put, it's light. And that's a question for you. Have you ever picked up a Les Paul, a Gibson Les Paul?
Well, I owned a Gibson Les Paul, a Gibson Standard, and it was made of solid mahogany. The
thing must weigh 50 pounds, doesn't it? That's a heavy guitar.
I used to have backaches. Because I would play. The way I played back then, when I first was nonstop. Like anytime I had that around my shoulder, the strap, and the guitar hanging, that always, and it was painful. It was painful.
Yeah, that's a heavy son of a gun. It takes a special breed to play a Les Paul. Well, Angus Young is not a big guy. And they asked him, why do you play that SG? He said, because it's light. I'm a little guy. I can rock around with that thing. You hand me anything else, it's too heavy. It's like dragging an anchor around.
It's a lot of weight for that guitar. And I did sell it, or I traded it. Actually, I went to Ed's Guitar here in Miami, which is no longer around, like a lot of places. Sure. And I walked into Ed's Guitar, and by the way, I had bought it there years before. When I bought it, it was brand new. I played it so much that the frets were dented in, and some frets were. That's how much I mean, I can't even remember. I've forgotten how much I've practiced guitar in that time, and forgotten a lot of things on guitar since that time. But during those days, I wore the frets down in certain places where you'd fret a chord and you'd get buzzing, and I was like, man, I've wasted this guitar. I got to change it in my, ignorance. And I went down to the Ed's Guitar, and I traded it in for a kind of like a rockabilly hollow body, 1950s style guitar, and which was not the same. If looking back now, that Gibson was the bomb, and the one I bought was pretty cool. I still have it. But nowhere's near. And I changed it out. Later, I found out you could actually change the frets.
Oh, yeah. The fret job, I don't know what it would have cost you back then. But it sounded like it needed a complete refretting job if you wore them that much. Sometimes you can recrown and polish them out. But if it's worn down that much to where you're getting a serious case of buzz on every time you try to fret that specific chord, they just needs a new set of frets in it. Was it a real American Gibson SG?
It was an American Gibson SG.
Yeah.
Solid mahogany. It was solid mahogany, and it had sort of like a wine finish to it, deep red finish to it. It was. Let's put it this way: you could also double as a weapon, a club, because
Yeah.
it was so heavy. You could probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Mahogany bodies are heavy, heavy, heavy.
it was barbaric.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna sit here and lie, but so nothing. That's the list of guitars. Just a little.
Oh, they missed so many.
Well, yeah.
Oh, they missed so many.
Well, no, there's others, but I wanted to go into it unless you have a direction you wanted to go in.
Oh no, I just, looking down the list over here from the folks in the chat, like Daniel Haryu and Jim Dockrell, he's been throwing them all over the place.
Well, let's see what they got.
Throwing out a bunch of different guitars. Talking about Jimmy Page's double neck Gibson.
Right.
Frankie CNC and Woodworking says Steve Carr built the first axe for Gene Simmons. I do have drawings to make a copy of Gene Simmons's Punisher bass, but it's not the axe bass.
Okay.
So let's see. I think that was about it. Alvin Lee's 335. I do like the old hollow body Gibsons, but I also like, Brian Setzer and his 59 Gretsch.
Yeah.
I mean, with the dice for volume knobs and stuff like that. Prince's Cloud guitar.
I want to say something about that. Harju did mention that. Well, go ahead.
Which one?
The Cloud guitar.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I just want to say that Prince has some pretty gnarly, awesome looking guitars throughout history. On YouTube as well. For people in the year 2089, that's a site where you could go and upload videos. Oh, what's videos? It's the equivalent of what you would now call imagery that pops out from your retinas in front of you in space. But back then we had YouTube.
There you go, future casting again.
On YouTube, there is an actual build in England that was commissioned, and Prince never got it because he passed away during it. But we'll try to find that video too. We'll add some more content to our Facebook page. And by the way, we're sponsored by Harneal Media. That's Steve Nealon, and they do websites at the level of whatever level that you need, but in a very personalized. You tell them what you need, and it's a great deal. So you can check out harnealmedia.com. But on YouTube, the guy builds Prince a purple, gnarly shaped, beautiful custom guitar that's to die for. And to die for, and it's beautiful. So yeah. So I just wanted to mention that because it's part of the theme.
And since you're talking about Prince, let me just say again, he I think is and I don't think anybody would argue with me about it. He is the most underrated guitarist out there.
To die for.
And it's simply because he played so many instruments that he never really focused on one. But to listen to that man play, you wonder how he was ever known for anything else. Yeah. I mean, he could have done nothing. He could have done no songwriting. He could have done absolutely no singing. Mm-hmm. He could have done nothing but play guitar, mm-hmm. and would have been just as famous as he was for everything else he did. He was that good. And when people think about Prince, they don't think guitar. They think music, but they don't think guitar. But the man was absolutely phenomenal.
A couple of things pop into my mind. One is Matt Haas in one video when he dressed up as Prince. And
now you need to stop sidetracking like this, because that's 3 videos you're going to have to link now. And I say you because I don't know which ones they are.
We'll go in and link those this evening. So another little sort of part of this whole musical thing is music studios where people record. There's a bunch of famous ones.
I know less about that than I do about anything else because I never got into the real recording side. Now I know there are a few famous studios, but I
Like,
really don't know. Well, Sun Studio
that's
in I
awesome.
believe Memphis.
Yep.
Um,
And
let's
that who recorded there in your recollection?
Oh my God, who didn't? Let's see. How far back do you want to go? BB King, Muddy
Mhm.
Waters. Didn't Elvis do some
Oh
recording
yeah,
at Sun?
for sure.
Um, Here more recently, I know Justin Johnson did some recording at Sun Studio. Oh boy, I mean, that's just
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Jerry Lee Lewis. Just the people who walked through that door, sat down and played, no matter what instrument it was. I mean, it's a who's who of music, and not of any one particular genre.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I think
Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash, I think just about everybody who was anybody recorded at least one tune there. I mean, it's the who's who of music.
Have you seen or driven by
No,
the Capitol Record? No, not Sun, but the Capitol Record building in Los Angeles?
not to my knowledge. I don't know that I've ever been exactly in Los Angeles. I've spent some time in Southern California, but most of it was out around San Bernardino area. Got close to Los Angeles a couple of times, but I don't know that I've ever driven past the Capitol building, but I've seen pictures of it as
A
everyone.
lot of recordings have gone on there.
Mhm.
I don't know if the building is still around,
I don't either.
but the Beach Boys recorded there.
Mhm.
A lot of the famous songs that we heard back in the day. It's just one of those buildings. And how about Abbey Road?
Yeah, Abbey Road over in the UK. I mean, that's iconic and still around, isn't it?
Um, yes, for sure. Actually, yeah, it's 100% around.
Okay.
Jamie Page, maybe 2 years ago, went there specifically to write my name out front and
Okay.
took
Well,
video of it.
I know the road is still there. I just didn't know if the studio was still there and being used as a studio, or if maybe.
Yeah, it's well, to me, it's like an iconic, obviously because of the Beatles, but other people recorded there too.
Mhm.
Pink Floyd, I believe, recorded there as well, and as well as many others.
Mhm.
How about a little known? I don't know if it's still around. Hitsville, USA, which is Motown's headquarters in Detroit.
Okay. Now, I would not have gotten it by that nickname. And I'll be honest, I don't know the studio in Motown. I really don't.
They recorded in a room
Hmm.
that in a house,
Hmm. Oh, really?
and they set it up. Many of those tracks that we hear
Hmm.
were recorded like in a room in a house, like an
Hmm.
old school house. In fact, what I'll do is I'm gonna right click, which was a method back in the early 2000s, and I'm gonna share it with you privately. But for those that are interested, I am going to immediately transfer it to our web page on Facebook, and you can see Hitsville, USA, and I'm linking it right.
Holy cow, that is it, huh? It's just a itty bitty little house with bright blue trim. Holy cow. As big of a fan of Motown music as I am, you would think I would have heard of that. It's
That's
just a little nondescript little blue house or light blue house with dark blue trim, bright blue trim.
I mean, that's painted up new now, but
Mhm.
it's just a little house that you'd find in the corner of a
Yeah.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, they recorded a lot of the Motown hits
Wow.
right there.
I mean, and that was music that changed the world,
Hmm.
as much, and people can argue with me on that, but I think as much as rock and roll changed music, Motown did the same. It really did, because it went off in this other separate direction, and we occasionally saw a fusion between the two.
Yeah.
But that just, yeah, I don't know. I'm a huge fan.
Well,
Huge.
they recorded a lot of the hits from that little. That's why I always tell people when we get into the conversation of, and it's kind of the same thing with woodworking and all these things where people say, and I get the point, the opposing sort of point of like, well, you need this, and that. And granted, it makes it easier
Sure.
to have all the latest and greatest things to perform what you need to do.
Sometimes.
But sometimes, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
but you can have a massively awesome recording with very basic things. The most basic things, instruments and equipment that you might have now was or is miles and miles away of what they had inside that studio at that time,
Truth.
just contained in your computer.
Truth.
So,
Truth. Yeah.
you know, you can produce awesome things. It takes skill because you have to actually engineer and equalize and, you know, balance and all that, but it can be done. So you don't need necessarily this massive array of equipment, although it makes it nice to be able to have all those options.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, you know, there was music before there was the wall of sound.
Yeah.
Although Phil Spector's techniques did make it into a lot of mainstream music. But yeah, I mean, you know, they've been making music since people first learned how to modulate their voices and bang rocks together. So anything that you have right now is going to produce good music.
Yeah, as long as you have something good to start off with.
Yeah, exactly. You know, but because, you know, as a musician, I've heard it said over and over and over again, but not being a player, I don't have anything to back up what I say. But you've heard over and over and over again, a more expensive guitar won't make you a better player.
No.
Now, it's true, you have to have decent quality equipment in order to make sounds. I mean, you can't have strings breaking every time you strum, and you can't have it going out of tune halfway through a track.
Right.
Every time you try to lay one down. But if you can, I mean, people have been making music forever and ever and ever, and anything you can buy today is better than what they had.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
the basic microphone, like I'm using to record this, and I'm not, for instance, I have my microphone maybe about a foot and something away from me, a foot and some odd distance from me. It's not up close to me, so you can't judge. But the closer I bring it, you'll capture the full spectrum of the voice. But this is sort of like an ambient, nice, middle of the way audio, and comfortable for me to move around. But the microphone that I have that I'm using is a Samson CO something or other, and it's about $80 to $100. And in this particular case, it's USB, but there's a model that's quarter inch, you know, and XLR to quarter inch, and it's the same model but with that sort of feature. And I have it too, and you can record awesome tracks with it, because part of the whole thing is equalizing and all that. But $80, you know, and you have a guitar and this and that and some software, you could record as long as you have the engineering skill, and nobody will know the difference, to be honest with you, of where you're recording it.
Yeah.
Nowadays.
Yeah. And there are so many free software packages out there and free software options for recording your music and then mixing and blending and doing everything else. If you got something wrong, you know, whatever. I mean, heck, you can find this stuff for your phone or for a tablet. I mean, it's out there, and some operating systems come with it already installed. It's an option. You know, you can go to the App Store and download it for nothing.
I mean, it's so much so the case that you could do it all in-house. There was a contest maybe 5-6 years ago. There's a channel called Pensado's Place, and he's an engineer for very famous bands, more recent bands and stuff, but he's an old timer from back in the day, so he has his portfolio of bands he's engineered for. But nowadays, there's a lot of these pop acts and whatnot, so he's got that under his arm in his briefcase. And so Dave Pensado started a show for engineers specifically for this era that we live in, which is quite unique for engineers and music lovers that produce music, because there's a whole group of people that do it from their homes. And he decided to do a contest to see who had the best mix of a particular song, and he put the song tracks out there, and then the winner would get X amount of this, and that. And he spent, I don't know how much time listening and reviewing and this and that, and finally came to the decision of who the winner was. And he says, and the winner is so and so from this place. I forget the details, but the gist of it is that when he did his show to reveal and talk to the person via webcam, like we all do, because that's what everybody does. And so the guy starts. Dave Pensato interviews the guy, and you see the guy sitting there, and he's got a laptop on the side, and he's sitting there looking at the webcam at Dave Pensato, and he asks, so how did you mix this? What were your speakers, and what was your this, and what was your that? And the guy said, no, I just mixed everything with my headphones and my laptop.
Yeah. And
Pensato at that moment said, because it's a big no-no. Mm-hmm. And this guy's a professional, and he's telling, and he asked this kid this, it's a big no-no to edit only on headphones.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot do that, because if you do that, the going consensus is your mix will sound great on your headphones, but nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking a risk, because no matter what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to do headphones, do speakers, do other speakers, play it in your car, play it on a stereo, and judge the medium sort of best set, where it sounds the best in all locations, and that will be your mix. But this guy did it all through his headphones without even thinking, and he's the winner. And Pensato was shocked, because that's not the way you do it.
Well,
and it worked.
I mean, history is filled with stories of guys who didn't do it the way it was supposed to be done and came out the winner.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it doesn't have anything to do with this discussion, but remember, the Titanic was built by experts and the Ark was built by an amateur.
Yeah.
So
you're totally right, man.
I mean, now if you're talking about brain surgery, it's probably important to listen to what the experts have to say. But if you're mixing something for yourself, mix it. If you want to do it on your iPhone, go for it.
Hey, even the Aztecs or Incas, whichever ones, did brain surgery.
Yeah.
And according to what we see is that they still walked around pretty okay.
Yeah. And
so I'll throw this out there. If you want to be a brain surgeon, do some tests out there.
Yeah,
first.
Test on yourself first, But you know what? I can't really say a whole heck of a lot about those cultures being that advanced. I mean, their calendar stopped in 2012,
Which is a funny thing, because we did touch on that subject in the past episode. So it's kind of a little reference, and I don't know if you wanted it revealed or not, but it's a good place to explain that that we also have
we have our website. TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com, sponsored by Steve Nealon over at Horror Neil Media, the webmaster to the stars. And you go over there to TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com. We have one big button up in the center of the banner called the Wayback Machine. You click on that, you can go back and check out every episode we've done since episode 1. Way back when we were young and spry, had less gray hair, and knew kind of what we were talking about anyway. And or if you're not much for websites, if you think those are old, let me future cast for the people you've been talking to. Websites were these things that were what we called online. And when you went online, you sat down in front of this box called a computer and you typed it. You had to literally type. Your fingers had to move. And you typed in TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com. Then you hit enter. And it the web page would refresh a little bit. It would go straight to our website. And you click something called a link up on the top. It says Wayback Machine. You click that. And then it would open up another page. I know the pages moved, and you had a big old long list of every episode that we did. And that's, kind of it in a nutshell.
Well, it's a good thing you did that, because in the meantime, I added a couple of links to our Facebook page, which is Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook. and that's the Prince link, and I added the Trigger guitar link, and I did mention another one which I've forgotten since. But,
Okay,
oh,
that
well.
would that would be Matt Haas and his Prince video.
I think he I think he hid that one.
Yeah, I think he had to make it private. There were copyright issues.
Mm-hmm.
Go figure. Copyright issues with a YouTube video. Oh man. Now I got Frankie over here saying, Frankie CNC and Woodworking saying, you don't have to type that link, Mark. Just tell Google. See, now you have to, Frankie, explain to the listeners in the future what a Google is.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
for all we know,
for all we know, all of this is obsolete technology, much like the telegraph and the player piano.
but they're still cool to look at. I wonder if this is a nice, because I wonder, I just wonder this, and this is for everyone listening now. When you watch an old movie, run into old documents and whatever, and you look at it and you're like, wow, this is vintage, and this is, that feeling of like, wow, we're peeking into the past and there's this vintage feeling and stuff. Will we doing this now, going forward 100 years, will this appear vintage?
That would have to.
Will we appear vintage?
It would have to. It would have to. I mean, I'm sitting here right now as we record this in January of 2020. I'm 58 years old, soon to be 59. But there will be a time that I'll look back, and no matter how old I feel right now, there will be a time I'll look back and go, God, look how young I was. Was I ever really that young?
It's an amazing thing, but you're right, because I see that with Facebook posts from the past. You know how they'll bring up 9 years ago, you were doing such and such. Here's the picture. And I look at it, holy smokes, man.
Oh, yeah. But just think about what it's going to be like 40 years in the future. I mean, you and I are both doing the family tree thing, and we're going back to genealogy and this, that, and the other. Can you imagine some kid 40 years from now bringing up a picture of grandma standing in front of a mirror with an iPhone doing the duck face?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's going to happen.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you something about the duck face thing, and that's a great example. Isn't it much more distinguished and like a nice thing to go back and like all the pictures that we have? Everybody had a solemn sort of like respectful just look. I have one of my great grandmothers. She's just staring into the camera. Her lips are tight. She's looking, forward into the and grandmas from nowadays in the future are going to have duck face, pouts on their face. How, are people going to? You can't actually print that out and put it on your wall and frame it. Can you?
Don't challenge me. Don't challenge me. Yeah.
Could you frame it? Could you imagine future, like you walk into, I'm going over to so-and-so's house, and like all on their walls, they have their ancestors and they all have duck faces.
Yeah. Oh, that's my great grandmother over there. 200 years from now, that's my great grandmother over there. What does her tattoo say?
Yeah.
How old was she there? 13. Oh
no, dude. I'm telling you right now, bad form. I think that they should have thought of it twice, but unfortunately, that's what the future is going to look like.
Oh yeah. It
Could
will.
you imagine Time Life magazine retrospective? They open up and there's a bunch of duck faces.
Yep.
Bad.
I just came up with an idea for a book, because I think, if the apocalypse ever happens, we're going to go back to the printed word, and information will be stored in books again, because the digital medium will be just gone. So I can just imagine a book 300 years in the future, bad decisions of the 20th century. And there's every Facebook photo ever posted printed in that ding-dong thing.
I know, dude. I just, and frankly, just back then they looked, solemn. There's no smile. That's perfectly, or maybe that's the way we look at it. Maybe in the future, those duck faces will be like,
well, but there's a reason why they had a straight, solemn face and they looked so rigid and everything. And that's because you're talking about daguerreotype and tintype and the older photographic styles. The exposure times were so long, you had to sit still. It wasn't just a snap of the picture and that was it. They opened the shutter and then you had to sit there like that.
You're right.
So
Yeah.
it was easier on everybody involved if you just got a comfortable face and stayed that way and don't move. And then he would time it down with his pocket watch, time it down, and then he'd slip the shutter back in. It's okay, you can breathe now.
But could you imagine?
Yeah.
You open up from the 1800s and you see your grandma. You know,
Mhm.
she's throwing up some peace signs.
Yeah. Throwing signs and stuff.
And it doesn't hold the same sort of depth. And so, well, that's something to be thankful about.
Yeah. Speaking of things to be thankful about, I'm just glad that no social media or cell phones existed when I was a kid.
Oh yeah,
Because there's no evidence of any of the stupid stuff that I did other than what I say or what someone else tells about me.
you
So
keep that all in your brain.
that's right. Some secrets are better left kept that way.
Well, we have come to that time. We are about to say goodbye, but I do want to say that well, we always have interesting stories, and we never know where we're gonna go. I did have something, set up, which is what we went through, and we kind of stuck with it for the most part.
Mhm.
But we don't know where we end up in some of these conversations. So if you're interested to listen more, go to trampledunderfootpodcast.com, and we have a Wayback Machine button. You press that and you can check out our past episodes. And I think that it's what episode was it? 11. That was the Atom Smasher.
Oh, I want to say 14.
14.
It was either 11 or 14. I don't remember right off the top of my head.
You should check out that one, and you could read the title. It says Atom Smasher. That's a great episode. It's a very entertaining story. And then there's a recent one that occurred just late last year in 2019, where Mark and Linda were woken up to a big surprise that unexpected. And that's a great episode too, which is
That's episode 69, Things That Go Drunk in the Night.
Yeah. So you might want to check that one out too. And yeah, another one that I enjoy a lot was one that we talked about when we were discussing the issues of mail order everything. And we typically think of nowadays sort of like Amazon and whatnot, where you order, it gets to your house.
Yeah.
But back in the day, there was the Sears catalog, and we were surprised, or I was surprised, at how far back it really goes. So we have some great stories in that episode. Just check out the Wayback Machine and see what tickles your fancy. I think we're good to go.
I think we're very good to go. So just in closing, say thank you to everybody out here in the YouTube live chat. For those of you listening on the podcast, we record these sessions every Tuesday night at 9:30 Eastern time, 6:30 Pacific time on our YouTube channel. Just go to the Mighty YouTubes and search for Trampled Underfoot Podcast. We'll see you there. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
See, we threw out the peace sign.
Yeah, got to do one last